Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel, and my guest today, Faye Blake. Welcome, Faye.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to be here. Thanks for asking me. It's always good fun to have an interview.
Well, I was looking at the healing seminar that's coming up at the Astrology Lodge online on Saturday, the 22nd, and your talk caught my eye. So I thought it would be really nice to have a chat.
Okay, well, I'm glad it caught your eye. That's the general idea.
Well, it caught my eye because the title is Health, Genes and Ceres. So I guess the first question is, what is Ceres in the astronomical sense?
Well, let me tell you first why I got interested in her, because I was doing the master's program, which is now in Lampeter, and I was doing an essay which was about Uranus, which is about how when a planet gets discovered, the consciousness changes. So we have big jumps in consciousness. So, and while I was doing that, I was one of the first that was doing that back when it was still in Bath. Ceres was an asteroid for a very long time, and she was upgraded during that period or upgraded, whatever you like to call it, but she became a dwarf planet. So I thought, wow, great, she's on an even footing with Pluto now, the same as Pluto. And everybody was going, oh no, Pluto's still a planet, you know, he is so. And I'm thinking, what about Ceres? Hooray! she's also a planet. So that's sort of how I got interested in her, because she was discovered originally in 1801. She's got a similar chart to the UK, which is always interesting. She's got the same date, the 1st of January 1801. She was an asteroid, and some people still refer to her as an asteroid, but I like to see her as a dwarf planet because I think she's between Mars and Jupiter, astronomically speaking. So she's a lot closer to us. She's the closest dwarf planet to us, and I think that makes her really important. That's one of the reasons. And the other reason is I think she's really important is that she's, until now, you know, I mean, originally she was a planet, and then in 1850 we had all these pesky other female things coming in that were going to be planets. so that had to be put a stop to in 1850, and now she's back in the fold as a female planet. But until now we only have Venus and the Moon. So why I found that interesting is in terms of consciousness and how we do Western astrology, is the Moon is always seen as the mother, you know, and the Venus is always seen as the beautiful young woman. So what about us oldies? We didn't really have an archetype. The older wise woman, you know, didn't really have an archetype. So, and I thought, well, that's interesting that she's coming back into the fold in 2006 when she was upgraded. So that's when I started really investigating her and looking at what was going on in 1801, but also in 2006. So that's a rather long answer to your question, but that's how I got interested, and that's what she is. I see her as a dwarf planet, so I think she is different from the other asteroids.
So she's actually closer than Chiron.
Much, yeah. She's between Mars and Jupiter, which I think says something about her as well. So, but yeah, she's much closer, yeah.
So what is her orbit then? It's
about 4.5 to 5 years. So between, you know, Mars and Jupiter 12 and Mars 2 or something, yeah. So it makes sense where she is in that space between the two of them.
So where is she right now?
She's in Taurus at the moment, so she's quite happy in there. She's the goddess of the grain, of course. And we get a lot of meaning from her, from the myth, of course, of Persephone, with her daughter Persephone, which many of you will know. But yeah, she's happy in Taurus. I think she's a very natural kind of goddess. And I think she's the goddess of the sort of post-menopausal woman. So I think she represents that older, wise feminine. You know, obviously she's in men as well as women. So it's just a feminine archetype. But what I love about her is she takes on Pluto. You know, she doesn't shy away from standing up for herself eventually in the myth. So I think that's interesting.
Exactly. So she is the Roman equivalent of Demeter.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think for people who are not familiar with the story, it'd be good to tell them the story
Yeah, well, you can, yeah, certainly you can look up the finer details online because there's lots of different versions of the myth. But it's basically that when Persephone, her daughter, or Proserpina, Roman and Greek, she was out in the fields plucking flowers, and she was abducted into the underworld all of a sudden by Pluto, by Hades, that came along and just swept her up and then took her to the underworld, and she was never to be seen again. So, and Ceres was away doing a shopping or something, and said to her friends, "Look after my daughter for me," she's a teenager, you know, she's becoming a woman, Persephone, she's at that age. So one of the things I think Ceres is about is rites of passage. So she's becoming a woman, and Ceres is becoming after menopause, we have different roles, I think. So she's going through a different rite of passage. So anyway, back to the story, she searches and searches the mother, and she's bereft and she's grieving. And a lot of people associate the myth with grieving and about loss, and that's true as well. But eventually she finds out where her daughter is through lots of different things, but she's told to go to Helios, yet another male god. He's all seeing, he's the sun, so he sees everything. And he says, "Oh, yes, you know, your daughter was taken by Pluto. What's the problem?" kind of thing. You know, she was ready to be married, you know, sort of thing. So Ceres goes through a long time of grieving and gets taken in and looks after she becomes a kind of nursemaid, which I think is one of the archetypes of Ceres. She becomes a kind of nursemaid to the king's son, where she's discovered by these women by a well. And she looks after him, and she puts him in a fire every night to make him immortal. But she, of course, that's done in secret. And eventually the mother of Demophon sees this happening and says, "What do you think you're doing? You know, that's my son you're putting in a fire." And that is that stage in the myth that she comes out as a goddess and says, kind of, "Don't you know who I am? Build me a temple," you know, kind of thing. So she then becomes outraged and then steps into her power, and then she's the goddess associated with summer and winter. So she eventually negotiates. She said, "I'm not giving you gods any food," because she's the goddess of the grain. So she's responsible for fertility and grain and food for people. So she eventually says, "No more food for the people, and then you won't be worshipped." So the gods think, "Oh dear, you know, we're not going to be worshipped anymore. We better do something about this." So they send Mercury down to get it all sorted. And to cut a longer story short, the negotiation results in summer and winter, where Persephone is above ground, and Ceres is really happy to have a daughter back, and below ground then it's winter, and then she's with her husband in the underworld. So there's loads of layers, you know, to the myth, to Persephone's story, to Ceres' story. But I usually focus on the story of Ceres becoming who she should be, finding a role after she's lost her daughter. So it's a lot about empty nest syndrome and those kinds of things as well, the feminine thing. But in terms of what I'm doing at the weekend, it's more about environment that I got involved. It's more about the environmental side of it that I got involved with that. So
I think what I find very interesting here is that, you know, you were talking about her negotiating. Mm-hmm. There is a negotiation. She tells them, right, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah, except that she doesn't get everything she wants.
Either you do right by my daughter.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that's her coming into her power. It's
Absolutely.
her realizing who she is. And I think when you were talking about her outrage that she wasn't recognized, not to have that recognition, I think many of us recognize that feeling, or, you know, are familiar with that feeling of that lack of recognition. And then there comes a point at which we say, hang on a minute.
Yeah, well, she's absolutely about Me Too. You know, she's absolutely about that movement and democracy to some, and she's a champion of the underdog, I think, as well. But certainly about women's rights in 1801, that was, you know, full-on suffragette periods, you know, in 1801, and then it was getting a bit too much. But yes, absolutely, she's definitely coming into power. But the thing is about her, she says what she wants, so she has a negotiation stance, and she has something to withdraw, which we all do at some point. But she doesn't get everything she wants. So the negotiation is she only gets a half the time, or the myth varies in how long she gets Persephone for. But what's also interesting, we don't hear what Persephone thinks.
Well, we know what Persephone thinks. However, the reason she only does get her for half the time is because there has, Persephone, for whatever reason, has eaten a grain of the, and therefore she's legally bound to be there, shall we say.
Yeah.
And so Ceres is wise enough to understand that, okay, that's fine, but nevertheless, my daughter's coming up, because I think that where she's also behaving like a mother is, it's not just about her loss, it's Persephone's loss, because she's now in darkness all the time.
Yeah, I think you can see that differently though, because I'm not sure that Persephone is also right to be married and to be sexually active. So what we don't hear in the myth is whether we hear later that Persephone is quite happy, with and being queen of the underworld. So I'm not sure we can necessarily assume that Ceres, she's obviously happy to see her mother every 6 months, but for all we know, she's absolutely happy to be in the underworld for as well.
But as many a mother will testify, young people don't always know.
Yeah.
And so, we always, as parents, have to
protect.
Not just protect, we have to, once our children grow up, we have to be able to also advocate when we see them straying. Advocate for what's best for them, and then hope that they will follow. So.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting though, because she's also the mother-in-law archetype. I mean, she's literally Pluto's mother-in-law, right? So she becomes, and that can be very necessary and good, or it can be a bit interfering, so again, it can work either way. So, but yeah, and interestingly, the mother-in-law was always the butt of jokes. And so that's also about the archetype coming into, older women being more valued, and that sort of thing as well is also part of that.
Exactly. So, okay, she's in Taurus. And funnily enough, I mean, if I was to attribute a sign to her as, as a rulership, I think Taurus for me seems the more natural, and she's sitting at the moment with Uranus. So what do you feel that is about?
The sign, you mean? About I know many people have tried to give a sign to her. I think she's quite a big archetype, so I think she's quite Saturnian. For me, a lot of her is about, she's quite sort of female Saturn as well. She's quite tough. She's, a lot of people say she's kind of the Earth Mother, and she's loving, but she isn't all the time. She really isn't. She's very tough and very rule oriented. And she's the mother of a teenager. That's very different from a lot of people say she's Cancer. I really don't think that. I think that Moon is Cancer. She's not watery, she's earthy. There's no question for me that she's an earthy thing. And I think she does look after the earth. So, Taurus fits if you have to have one. But I think she's got quite a few. Yeah.
But actually, no, my question is about what you make of her sojourn in Taurus, with Uranus sitting in Taurus at the moment.
Oh yeah, I've written a little bit about when they were meeting each other, but I think Ceres works together with other planets. So I think she's kind of giving them a kind of prod in the arm to say, come on, change things for the earth, look after the earth. We need to be looking after the earth. We can't go on like this. She's a real protector of animals, of the earth, and I think they can work quite well together. I think. I mean, when she was together with Pluto, it was the Louisiana oil spill. So I think she kind of wants us to she's trying to make us aware of what we're doing to the earth by digging in the earth and hurting the earth, and using her resources and all of that sort of thing. And she was conjunct Neptune when the tsunami in Japan, with the tsunami and the nuclear plant. So I think she's not happy with the sort of overpopulation and the overuse of her resources on Earth. So I think she's using Uranus to kind of make us aware of that. She's working with him, I think, to try and wake us up about what we're doing to the planet.
So what do you feel then the link is to in terms of health?
And health, yeah. Well, the reason, I mean, she's got several different strands. So one of them is the women's, women and the role of women and things. But one of them is environmental things. So in 2006, when she was upgraded, that was when what's the film? The Al Gore film came out about what we were doing to the environment. So that was something that came out with 2006. It was also the end of the Human Genome Project, which I thought was really interesting, because what was known from 2006 is that genes don't rule everything, right? So just because you've got the BRCA gene, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get cancer. They know a lot more about genes since the Human Genome Project, and that finished more or less in 2006. So looking at what was going on there was interesting. But I always thought, as a goddess of grain, she had, the summer and winter and the climate change and things like that. She always had something to do with the environment and the looking after the earth and animals and, the death of species. So I started looking at things like the oil spills and earthquakes and things like that on a global level, because I've been, as I say, kind of researching her since 2006. And looking at different things that were going on since then, and when she was in particular contact with other planets. And then I started thinking, well, what about, I started, in my book, I did a little bit about environments, physical environments, because I think for us, she's where we can be abundant, so the signs in the houses in our own horoscopes show us where we can flourish, I think. So I was looking at that point of view. So, your office, your home, your emotional states and all the rest of it, the environment generally around you has a lot to do with health. We know that now. Too much stress makes us ill. So that's how I started looking at that. So some of the examples I've got on the weekend are about, the different people's different offices and what they feel comfortable in. So that's one way of looking at Ceres in your own chart in terms of environment. So, but the other thing is internal environment. So I got, you probably know Bruce Lipton's work, do you? Do you know Bruce Lipton? Yeah, his work on epigenetics and looking at the genetic components of things doesn't really explain health. So I then started looking at epigenetics, and I looked at a load of people to see where Ceres was in their horoscope, because I thought genes and DNA and genetics and things might be associated with Ceres as well, because of her natural love of, I think she doesn't like vaccines. I think she likes things natural. So that's where I started looking at things like how stress changes your genes, and looking at actually the turning on and off of genetic, of epigenetic factors that causes more disease. So then the couple of examples I've got of people who were written off as being terminal for cancer, and what they did and what environments they did and what they said about how they healed. Because I think it can give us, our horoscopes can give us some idea of what a healing environment is for us. So that was sort of the steps for me, how I came into looking at it from external to internal environments, right down to cells and DNA. It's really interesting.
And that was what interested me in your talk, was that you're talking about her, but you were linking it to epigenetics, and that made me think, what a very interesting way of approaching this you have. But it makes sense, because I would say that if there's one thing that we're beginning to get our heads around, is that we are interlinked with nature.
Absolutely.
And so we have, over the centuries, and this goes back to when we first started using the word pagan, which was actually in pre-Christian times, where people were looking at those who lived in the country, looking down their noses at them, saying, oh, they're very pagan because they're not civilized, as in living in society, polite society. Well, polite society has rather got us in a lot of trouble.
Absolutely.
And we have become more and more divorced from nature. And I don't think we really understand the nature of illness. We have this model that says illness is caused by viruses, bacteria, cells going wrong. But actually, fundamentally, it's the fact that we don't look after ourselves. We're not looking after the environment. We are polluting the air, the water, the earth. Of course, we're going to become sick.
Yes.
And by the way, we're not even considering that as one of the reasons why we get sick, and yet it is. So we really need to get that whole picture, and that's why I thought it was interesting, because this is another, I guess, another pointer in that direction, particularly when we do know that so much illness can be, if we're looking at the cells, seen 10 years before it manifests. And so it's there, it's slow in the making, and the biggest stressor is lifestyle. And what does that include? It includes stress, it includes diet, it includes all of those things that we do, you know, perhaps to be civilized.
Yeah, but also things like toxins and, you know, and electro smog and all this sort of thing as well. So it's the total environment, it's everything, but it's also emotional too. It's you know, it's everything. It's and Ceres is everything, I think, in the environment. And I think she's a real a sort of lobbyist, if you like, for going back to natural things too, you know. So it's interesting, I think, that I'll just mention this in the weekend as well, that of course everybody talks about coronavirus being, you know, the first death being recorded at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020, but a lot of people don't mention the fact that Ceres is right bang smack in the middle of that conjunction. You know, she's conjunct Pluto and Saturn as well. So we have a fight, I think, and it'll be interesting this year when what I'll look at is the Pluto Ceres cycle, which is quite short. But that it's interesting when you look at the squares and the opposite. The first opposition from 2020 is this year as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see what comes to fruition between, you know, Pluto, us trying to control everything with a vaccine and with everything else that's going on, and Ceres saying, for God's sake, you know, go back to nature and get vitamin D and whatever else you need to be healthy. You know, it's the people who are dying are the ones that are overweight and, you know, and got other things, other issues, and diabetic, you know, all kinds of other things. Whereas a lot of people are saying, you know, your immune system needs to be boosted with natural things. So Ceres, you've got Ceres on the one side and Pluto on the other side. I think us trying to use Pluto to control it. So there's a real clash, I think, coming up again with that. So it's interesting in that sense as well, I think.
Well, we wait to see what she does.
Yeah.
So this time. So
well, I'll talk about that the weekend. This first square was interesting. We had that. Yeah.
Spoilers.
Yeah, we don't. Spoiler alert. Yeah.
So
yeah.
if you would like to learn more about Ceres and the link with health and the environment, then the place to be is, I believe, on Zoom.
Well, I'll be on Zoom.
With the Astrology Lodge on Saturday, and it's from 10 to 5.
Yeah.
I will put a link to that on the description box. And if people wanted to contact you, Faye, do you have a website?
Yes, it's just my name, Faye Blake, and then .nl for Netherlands.
Lovely.
And I also do a little bit about Ceres in my book for physical, for like office environments, you know, or working environments. So
great.
That's my book. There's a web page for my book as well, if you want to look at that. And there's lots of blogs on my fayeblake.nl as well.
Fabulous. Okay, well, thank you very much, Faye, for your time today. And hopefully many people will be joining you on Saturday.
Yes, I hope so. Yes, come. The lodge was always fun. It's a pity I can't be there because I always loved going to the lodge. But anyway, come online. Thank you.
Thank you all for watching. And next time, well, we are going to be looking at other aspects of healing and astrology. Until then, goodbye.